Hey, what's going on, guys? Gumby here. Today I've got another benchmark video. I'm looking at Assassin's Creed Syndicate today. I just did a video the other day about my first impressions of this game. I'm about halfway through playing the main campaign, but I've done a lot of side quests and everything on this laptop and playing this game, so I want to do a benchmark video about it. And I was curious because I did buy Unity for PC last year, and I tried playing it on this exact same laptop, and I was having heating issues. The laptop would overheat after about half an hour of consistent play, and it would shut the game down because the internals were getting too hot. And even that was at low settings, at a low resolution, playing Unity. So I was very interested to see how Syndicate would run on this laptop, and I'm happy to say that I was able to get through all my tests. The fan is loud and the computer does get hot, but you don't reach any of those temperatures that you're seeing with Unity. So I think they made this game much more efficient. I'm running 3 resolutions, 720p, 1080p, and 1800p like normal, with low, medium, high, very high, and ultra graphical settings. So we'll be going through these tests in order from low to high, from graphical settings and as well as resolution settings. So we're going to start now at 720p on low graphical settings. What you're going to be seeing playing this game is you're getting exactly what you would expect at the lowest, what I would say the lowest resolution you should be playing at. It's at 720p. You're still getting high definition resolution, but not quite as high as 1080p and low graphical settings. Game's not as pretty as it can be. It's still a pretty game if you're looking at the gameplay, but of course it's low, so it's as low as it can get. I still like it, still playable, and you're getting those consistent 51 to 80 frames per second on average, but you're mostly sticking around mid 50s to mid to high 60s essentially. So you're really getting consistent gameplay, very smooth, and it's not a bad thing to look at still, but it can definitely go higher. Now we're moving to 720p on medium settings. Your frames per second, you drop a little bit. Of course, your graphics are getting a little bit higher and a little prettier. You're at 40 to 60 frames per second. You're still getting that consistent mid 50s to low 60s throughout playing on medium at 720p. So it's a very smooth game. It's not a game where you're going to need the 100, 200 frames per second like a competitive shooter for CSGO, for example. But I'm trying to show different gameplay here. So we have combat, running around the city, around with population, running around buildings, the climbing mechanics. So I'm trying to show the range of mechanics that you're going to experience in a game like Assassin's Creed. And so far, it's really standing up beautifully. We're moving at the high graphical settings now. This is where the game looks, obviously, from high, very high to ultra, the game's going to look a lot prettier. And there's not actually much of a dip from frames per second in terms of medium to high that we just saw. It does dip to about 39, but it still is going to 60 frames. You're still looking at 50, 60 frames per second. Here it even dipped to went up to 70, but you're not really doing much. You're just climbing up a building. You're not around a lot of people, and you're not in combat. But even here, when I'm doing observing the area for just a checkpoint, I'm at 47, 53 frames per second. There's a lot of buildings that it's loading right now, and it's loading those on the fly. So I'm very happy with the performance at 720p high graphical settings. Moving to very high, you're gonna see this is where FPS is starting to dip throughout all the settings. You're looking at 28, 38 frames per second. I'm in a building. I have a lot of people around me, and I'm in stealth combat. So there is a lot going on, but it's very consistent in terms of the frames that you're seeing in these few clips. It's a pretty game. You're not at a super high resolution. You're already seeing a pretty decent dip in frames per second. So I wouldn't have you expect to be able to run a game like Assassin's Creed at such a high graphical settings on any resolution that you're going to play, and that's to be expected in my opinion based on the legacy of the games. We're at ultra graphic settings now for 720p. Not much of a dip from very high to ultra, and you're going to see that consistently throughout these resolutions. You're looking about 28, 35 frames per second. Still very playable for this type of game. 30 frames per second is playable for a third-person action adventure game like this. I still prefer 60 just because it's so smooth, but you still can play at 30. The thing that you need to be thinking about here is heating and fan usage of the laptop. It's going to be running really loud and really hot just because it's making those ultra graphics that you're able to see and play on. So something to consider if you're thinking about it. Now we're on the next resolution, 1080p. Low settings. you're already seeing the change from 720p to 1080p. We're at about 33 to 46 frames per second. You're not getting those 60 frames consistently anymore, and you're not really going to get it for the rest of this video. It's still... it's low graphics, so it's not the most beautiful game anymore, like you were able to achieve at 720p. But it is true HD resolution in terms of full 1080p. You're not sacrificing some resolution to playing at 720p. So there's a give and take for that. Just keep that in consideration if you think about running 1080p versus 720p. Moving to medium settings, 28 to 40 frames per second. This is about the frames that we were seeing for very high and ultra at 720p, to be honest. Here we're in a carriage ride. There's a lot of other AI around, a lot of other objects, and I'm looking about 28 frames. Here we're really high, so there's not a ton of objects, but it is rendering everything under us, and we're moving throughout using the zip line, and we're sticking about 30 frames per second. So I think consistently at 1080p medium graphical settings, you can fairly say you're going to be at about 30 frames per second consistently, which, like I said, in my opinion, is playable. It's not the most beautiful thing in the world. It's not as smooth as it could be, but it's definitely playable if you are really interested in doing 1080p at as high of a graphical settings as you want to be able to be at. Moving on to high graphical settings, we actually got a little bit of a jump here, and it might be just because of I'm in a different area of the map, but I was looking at 34 to 39 frames per second consistently, and I am surrounded by some AI. I am in battle, and I'm in an alley, so we're surrounded by buildings. So I was kind of surprised at having a consistent 34 frames per second, even when the graphical settings jumped up from medium to high, but we saw pretty consistent frames per second at 720p when we were talking about medium to high. So maybe that's just how this game runs. If you want to play on high or medium, I think you're going to get a pretty consistent play throughout. Moving to very high settings now, 19 to 23 frames per second. This is when you're seeing it in the video. It's very choppy. It's not that playable to me. I don't want to play a game under 30 frames per second. I play Xbox One games pretty consistently alongside my PC, so I'm used to playing that 30, 48 frames per second, so that doesn't bother me. But once you get down sub 30, to me, it's just not really worth it. You're getting a pretty game. You have very high graphical settings on 1080p, but it's just when it's choppy like this, it's not very fun for me. Ultra settings, not much to say. I got 3 frames per second. I was only able to record for a little bit before I was worried about my game crashing, and just the fact that it took me about 5 minutes to go into a menu. I don't even want to deal with that. Don't even try it. Moving on to 1800p low settings, we're already looking at 17 to 21 frames per second, so I'm already going to suggest you not play this game at 1800p resolution, which is the native resolution of the laptop. I wouldn't suggest it just because, like I said, the frames are terrible. It's not very buttery smooth. It doesn't really look very pretty, and there's not much you can do about changing it because you're at the lowest graphical settings, so just don't even worry about this resolution. I'm going to keep going, though. So looking at medium, 13 to 17 frames per second. It's a slight drop from what we were seeing at low, but like I said, you're averaging 15 frames. It's not even worth it. It's not even worth your time, and the resolution change from 1080p to 1800p isn't even that apparent, especially when you're only looking at 15 frames. If you were getting about 70 frames, maybe it would make a difference, but in my opinion, it's not really worth it. High settings for high graphical settings, 1800p, 12 to 15 frames per second. So this is showing the consistency between medium and high graphical settings. That's why I want to talk about it a little bit. It's not playable for 1800p, but it is consistent in terms of 720p and 1080p both having the switch from medium to high graphical settings, not having that much of a dip in frames per second, as much as high, the very high, is going to show you in a second. So that's really the point for this little clip. It's just nothing in 1800p is really worth playing, in my opinion. Now looking at very high, 5 frames per second. We're just above ultra 1080p frames. That had 3, we're getting 5. It's taking 20 seconds to cross this street because of how crappy the frames are. Yeah, it gave me a headache when I was trying to play it. It's too slow. I felt like I was playing in slow motion constantly, and actually rewatching it while I'm recording this commentary, I'm starting to get a headache again just thinking about it. Moving to ultra, 2 frames per second. It's just not playable. I was holding the stick down constantly, and I had to press run an A button over and over and over again for it to actually happen on the screen, because you're just running in such slow motion. It's 2 frames a second. I don't think I really need to say anything other than don't do it, don't try it unless you want to get sick, because that's what I feel like when I was playing this game at 2 frames. But that's pretty much it. I am happy to say the game runs very well on this laptop. I've been playing it pretty consistently on the laptop, actually over my desktop computer, just because it's portable and it runs so well. I think I'm playing at 1080p medium settings. You're getting consistent frames, and the heating's not a problem. The fan is loud, but it's loud on all settings in general, just because the game is so powerful and it creates a lot of heat into the laptop. But hope this video helped, guys. Let me know if there's any suggestions of games that you want. I've done a bunch of games now. I have a playlist running, so I'll put a little info card in the top right corner now if you want to check that out. You can check out any of the games I've done, like Fallout 4, Star Wars, Counter-Strike Go, many games like that. I think next I'm going to be looking at Grand Theft Auto 5, so if there's any game in particular you want me to look at, just put a comment of what game it is, and if I have it, I'll definitely be able to do it, and if I don't, I'll try to see what I can do to play that game for you. Anyway, hope your day is beer and Skittles, and as always, thanks for tuning in.